The Taegeuk Warriors campaign in the 2022 World Cup came to a close following its loss to FIFA number 1 Brazil in the round of 16 in the early hours of Tuesday morning Korea time. So, how did Team Korea do overall? Does the top-ranked team usually win the World Cup? And what are pundits saying about Asia's performance at the 2022 Games? Welcome to Issues and Insiders. Today we talk about Team Korea's performance at the 2022 World Cup and more. Also for that purpose, I have Kwon Soa here in the studio. Soa, it's good to have you back.
Glad to be here.
I also have Paul Williams, author at the Asian Game, live on the line in Doha, Qatar. Paul, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thanks for having me on the show.
Right, so let's start here in the studio then. Let's begin with details of the Taegeuk Warriors match against Brazil in the very wee hours of this Tuesday local time.
Right, in the very wee hours. So let me start by asking you, Sunny, did you actually stay up to watch the game or did you get up to watch the game?
I actually went to bed at 10 and then got up to watch the game at 4.
That was a good idea to do. Well, actually, I stood up, but I have to say it was very early in the day, but it was a really worth watching the game. And although South Korea was defeated by the 5-time champion Brazil 1-4. So let's get into the details. South Korea and Brazil met in the round of 16 at 4 a.m. Korea time this Tuesday, or 10 p.m. Monday, Doha time, at Stadium 974. And all of Brazil's 4 goals were scored in the first half of the game. It started with Vinicius Jr. in the 7th minute already, and then Neymar, who Brazilians have been longing to return to the field after his injury, was back and was successful in a penalty kick in the 13th minute. There were moments of bold and aggressive shootings on the South Korean side too, especially a number of times by Hwang Hee-chan, and there was also one big chance by Son Heung-min. But it was not before the 31st minute of the second half that Koreans had at least one goal to cheer about, which came from Baek Seung-ho, for whom the Qatar World Cup was the first World Cup for him, so his debut. So a miracle did not happen, but it was a well-fought game for the Taegeuk Warriors.
Right, and that being said, Paul, how do you evaluate Team Korea's overall performance at the 2022 FIFA World Cup?
It's a difficult one to assess because on paper it looks like a successful tournament for South Korea. The fact that they did make it through to the round of 16 for the first time in 12 years. They haven't achieved that since 2010 in South Africa. So on that you have to give them a tick and give them a pass mark. But they played 4 games. They only won 1 game and lost 2 of them, and lost heavily to Brazil, although I think, you know, Brazil will defeat a lot of teams on their way through this World Cup. But to still only win 1 game is probably slightly disappointing. They had chances to win other games against Uruguay and Ghana as well. So it's really hard to assess as to whether you consider it a success or whether you consider it just a pass mark or even slightly a failure, given the talent within this team. But I think to make it out of the group stage and get to the round of 16, given the difficult group that they had, you probably have to give it a slight pass mark, but there's still room for improvement for sure.
Right, and beyond Korea, so Japan also played Croatia in the very early hours of Tuesday Korea time. Now, this Asian team, Japan that is, has been, if I may, crafting a rather remarkable football narrative at the 2022 World Cup. Do tell us a bit about its match against Croatia and, of course, a bit about its earlier wins.
Sure. So although many had anticipated that South Korea and Japan meet in the quarterfinals, that didn't work out for both of them. The Japan versus Croatia match was a 120-minute long game plus some extra minutes, and it ended with the first penalty shootout of the 2022 Qatar World Cup, resulting in a win for Croatia. First, it was Japan that was leading, scoring a goal just a few minutes before the first half ended. That was by Daisen Maeda. Then some 10 minutes into the second half, Croatia equalized with Ivan Perisic's goal. And after a 90-minute game, the draw remained in the extra time, leading to a penalty shootout. There, Japan missed 3 spot kicks and Croatia only 1. So Croatia won and will now be facing Brazil. Nevertheless, just like South Korea, Japan's performance in the Qatar World Cup had many surprised. It got off to a perfect start and was in what was not an easy Group E that is, with a 2-1 win over Germany, a 4-time world champion. And then it lost 1-0 to Costa Rica, but produced an astonishing 2-1 victory over Spain. And with that, Japan made it into the round of 16 as the leader of the group. Japan never made it past through the round of 16, though, but it was very close this time.
Right. And speaking about the round of 16 poll, 3 countries from the Asian Football Confederation, namely South Korea, Japan, and of course Australia, advanced into the round of 16 at the Qatar Games. That being said, what would you say are the broader implications of this particular reality?
Yeah, it's a fantastic boon for Asian football to have 3 teams through to the round of 16. The first time that's ever happened in history, to have 3 teams through to the round of 16 in a tournament. So I think for Asian football, the implications are that it shows that there is some strength in the development within Asian football. There's still, as I mentioned with South Korea before, and the same goes for Japan and Australia, there's still a lot of room for improvement with the way that the teams are playing their football. But certainly I think it's fantastic, and it shows a lot of pundits expected Asian teams to struggle in this tournament so far, but we saw with some other results, Saudi Arabia beat Argentina, Iran almost made it through their group as well. So for Asia, this World Cup that's being held in Asia for just the second time, there were some fantastic results for Asia.
Right. And beyond Asia, over perhaps in Latin America, so Brazil currently ranks #1. Now, that being said, Soa, does the top-ranked team usually win the World Cup?
Sunny, the straight answer is no. Interestingly, so far, we had never seen a team that was going into the World Cup as #1 in the FIFA rankings win the World Cup. The rankings exist since 1994, since the 1994 World Cup, when Germany was at the top, but then was replaced by the winner that year, which was Brazil. But 4 years later, Brazil, while remaining the world's best in terms of the FIFA rankings, lost against France in the 1998 World Cup final. And again, 4 years later, it's not France who won the games, but again, Brazil. And then again in 2006 and 2010, Brazil was ranking #1, but in those years, it was Italy and Spain that clinched the World Cup trophy, respectively. This is even referred to as the World Cup curse. I don't know if there is any science behind this, but Brazil is definitely trying to break that curse more than ever this year, and especially with legendary Pelé fighting against cancer. Team Brazil said it wants to make their iconic football star proud by getting home the trophy.
Right, I see. And Paul, staying with FIFA rankings, how are these rankings calculated, and what is their significance perhaps?
Yeah, there's a lot of controversy around how these calculations and the rankings are done. It's effectively every match that you play, every competitive match you play has a certain number of points allocated to it. The more games that you win, the more points that you earn, and the higher up the rankings that you get. Obviously, if you lose competitive games, you don't get any points. So the more you lose, then the more you slide down the rankings as well. So there is some controversy around it. A lot of people don't think that it's the best reflection of the international football order, because there are some teams that try to manipulate it a little bit by simply not playing a lot of competitive friendlies and trying to maintain their ranking by not risking losing points. So that has happened in the past. But I think generally speaking, it's a relatively fair reflection of the international football order. As you said, Brazil are #1 ranked nation in the world at the moment. I think that's a pretty fair result, particularly on what we saw last night against South Korea. And after having seen what we saw last night, you'd probably consider them a very good chance to break that curse and be the first #1 ranked team to actually win the World Cup.
Right, I'm sure they'll have their fingers crossed for that. Back here in the country, so Korea's match against Brazil, as we keep mentioning, took place in the very early hours of Tuesday morning Korea time. That being said, though, I am aware, I mean, our colleague Shiu was out in the streets of Gwanghwamun early at that hour, and there were many football fans there, right?
Right. The cold weather, the early time were no excuse for these tens of thousands of fans. In fact, at least 20,000 people, and some calculated even more than 30,000, were estimated to have gathered at Gwanghwamun Square here in downtown Seoul for street cheering. And they started to gather at around 11 p.m. Maybe not earlier as during other matches because of the cold weather, because they have to stay there for hours and hours. And it was, in fact, around -3 degrees Celsius, and there was even in the early morning some snow, so that would be the first snow during a World Cup, because the World Cup is taking place in the winter now. This event in Gwanghwamun involved lots of mass cheering, and also ahead of the games, famous celebrities performed, DJing was going on as well. And due to these celebrations, subway lines were also extended to 2 a.m. and operations were also increased in the morning for the cheerers to straight off commute to work or go to school. But many also took to indoor venues because of the cold. Pubs and restaurants were filled with reservations, looking very different from usual Mondays and Tuesdays. And there were also many university students, despite having their final exams, going out for cheering as well. And some people also just took their day off from work. So that's where we have that Red Devil spirit again.
Right. And moving forward, Paul, the number of teams set to compete at the 2026 World Cup in North America has been expanded to 48, I believe, from the current 32. That being said, could you tell us a bit about the background behind this decision and, of course, also the criticism surrounding it?
There's been a lot of criticism surrounding it, has to be said. That I think the main driver behind increasing the number of teams is simply money. The more teams you have at the World Cup, the more revenue you're able to generate for FIFA, and it allows them to keep a lot more member associations happy by allowing them the opportunity to finally compete at a FIFA World Cup. On a pure football level, you can perhaps understand the reasoning behind it, because it doesn't, the current 32 team model doesn't necessarily allow for sort of a lot of emerging nations to be able to break through and get their chance at a World Cup, particularly here within Asia. So on that hand, you can understand why you might want to expand it to 48. The current 32 team model works really, really well. It's incredibly popular with fans all around the world. So there has been a lot of criticism of the move to 48 teams for 2026. FIFA are still yet to determine the structure of how that will be done. They had floated the idea of changing it from 4 teams per group to 3 teams per group, which isn't overly popular. They've now flagged again that they may move it back to 4-team groups, but the format as we know it, that's been in place for the last 20 plus years, is going to change for 2026, and there are a lot of people that aren't particularly happy about that.
Right, I see. Paul, we have a couple of minutes left, which is why I'm going to ask you this impromptu question. With regard to Team Korea's performance at the 2022 World Cup, you talked about how there is room for improvement. And that being said, of course, Paul, if you were supposed to pick one player that did quite well this time around, who would it be and why? From Team Korea, Paul.
I quite like Lee Kang-in from Korea, and I think he is the future of this national team. We saw Son Heung-min, the burden that he carries when he plays for Korea. He often carries the attacking burden, but everyone knows Son's strengths, particularly around the world, given his form for Tottenham over the last couple of years. So often when you see him, he's being double-teamed, triple-teamed by the opposition because they know his threat. He's 30, 31 years of age now, so there's no certainty he'll continue on through until the next World Cup when he'll be in his mid-30s. So I see the future of the Korean national team being built around a player like Lee Kang-in. He came off the bench in the Ghana game in particular and really changed that game, and he showed flashes throughout this World Cup that he is the sort of the next generation player of this Korean national team. Of course, it was confirmed after the game that Paolo Bento will not continue. So there'll be a new coach that comes in, and I'd like to see him build this team around a player like Lee Kang-in, because I think he can be the next generational talent for this team.
Right, and hopefully you're right. All right, Paul, thank you so much for making the time to join us live at this hour. Thank you for your time and your thoughts. And Soa here in the studio, thank you very much for your insights.
Always my pleasure.
Right, well, that is all the time we have for today. We'll be back same time tomorrow. Do join us then. Thank you for now.